Welcome to the 8th grade Math Homework Helper Series. Tonight's homework is F-6, Qualitatively Describing Functions. We'll start by talking about what we're doing when we're qualitatively describing functions. When a function is described qualitatively with a graph and without specific values, it provides a way to identify basic relationships between the variables. This type of graph can show whether a function is linear, nonlinear, increasing, or decreasing. Remember, the x-axis should represent the independent variable, and the y-axis should represent the dependent variable. With that in mind, let's take a look at question number 3. The directions for 1 through 7 are to graph the relationship between the two quantities, and then label the axes for each graph. So question number 3 states, the more money that a company charges for an object, the fewer people that will buy it. The relationship changes at a constant rate. Represent the cost of an object versus the number of people that will buy it. Well, in this problem, we have a couple of things. As you can see, we have a company charging money for an object, and the more money that it charges, the fewer people that'll buy it. So let's think about what a title could be for this. So we could title this graph, the relationship between cost and buyers. That'd be the first step. The second step is labeling the y-axis and the x-axis. The third step is coming up with what is going to be my y value. Now the y value needs to be the dependent relationship, and I labeled that over on the side here. You don't need to label that on your own graph. So there is a trick though that we can use for this because of the word versus. If the word versus is in the problem, then that's a clue to let you know that the very first thing that's talked about has to be the x value, and what comes after the word versus has to be the y value. So you can use that in a problem that has the word versus. If it doesn't have the word versus, then you're going to have to try and break down what's the dependent and what's the independent. So but let's look at it from both sides. I know, based on that little trick, that what comes first has to be in the x value. So in this problem it says represent the cost of the object, so I know cost has to be the independent. Does that make sense? Well, it does if you think about it, because cost can be changed, right? It says here this company can charge more for the object, and the more that it charges, the less people that'll buy it. So it's independent in the sense that it's up to the company to determine what it will be, and based on what they choose, then this is the cause, right? And the dependent then would be the effect. If they raise money, the effect is fewer people buy. If they lower the price, the effect is more people buy. So that's how we get dependent and independent. But again, a quick, easy way to look at it, if it has the word versus, if cost is in front of versus, cost is going to be your x. Whatever comes after the word versus, number of people that'll buy, that's going to be your y. So we've come up with a title, we've labeled the x and y axis, we have our y value, which is going to be our dependent value, we have our x value, which is going to be our independent value, and now we need to figure out what kind of a graph we have. And one of the things you want to look for in the word problem is an explanation of the kind of rate that you're looking at. And in this case, it states we're looking at a constant rate. So when you see the word constant rate, that should indicate to you that it's going to be a linear or straight line graph. And so we need to show that as the cost increases, assuming that everything starts at 0 down here and we work our way this way, cost is increasing as we go this way, number of buyers are increasing as we go up. So that means down here cost is close to nothing, right? And as it goes up, we have more buyers. But as the cost goes up, we move this way, you can see we're getting less buyers, less buyers, less buyers, less buyers, and by the time we get down here, we're at almost no buyers at all. So this linear line represents the relationship between the cost of a product and the number of buyers willing to purchase it. Now let's take a look at question number 5. Question number 5 states that Suki opens a high-yield savings account with a certain amount of money. Each day she earns interest on the money in her account, which then gets added back to the savings account. She does not add to or subtract any other money from the account. Represent the time Suki has the account versus the amount of money in the account. So we see the word versus again, which is pretty common in problems like this. So we can use the cheat idea of whatever came before versus has to be X, whatever came after versus has to be Y. And so at that point, we have time versus amount of money. So we can jump right to the X and Y labels, and we know that what comes before the word versus, which in this case is time, is going to be our X value, right? And our time is in days. And we know that what comes after the word versus is going to be the amount of money. And let's jump back to part number 1 then, step number 1, and determine what is a good title for this graph. We can call it the relationship between time and money. And you could say the relationship between time and money in Suki's high yield savings account. It could be, but you don't need to have that much. Okay, number 2, again, we're just going to label the Y value, the Y axis and the X axis. And now we need to think about what's happening in this. She starts with a certain amount of money. So we're not starting at 0 because it says she starts with a certain amount of money right here. And then it says that she's earning interest every day, which gets tossed back into the account, which then gains even more interest. So, but it doesn't indicate that it's going to be a linear line. So as you can see, what we have here is we start at a certain amount above 0, and then as the additional amount that gets added in each day then gets compounded again for interest, we have this arced line indicating the amount of money that she would have in her account. And lastly, we're going to take a look at question number 8. Explain how you decide which quantities should be used to represent the x-axis and the y-axis. Well, this is simply if the word says versus, whatever comes first is the x value and whatever comes second is the y value, which we talked about. But if you don't see the word versus in the problem, then you have to just remember that the independent is always the x value and the dependent is always the y value. Please use the work that was done for you tonight to help you to solve the additional problems that are on your homework. And remember, the key to success in math is not only working hard, but working smart.